Jelena Mijanović is an architect working at Codesign as part of the management. She is the founder and head of the Codesign Research Studio, an independent, non-profit research studio that investigates the architectural implications of current politics. Jelena also holds a position as a lecturer at the KTH School of Architecture. She has previously been a critic and teacher at Pratt Institute, Parsons School of Design, and Columbia University School of Architecture in New York. Her work and teaching focuses on the relationship between socio-political and spatial exclusion in our society today. So, please welcome Jelena Mijanović.
I forgot them. Somewhere in time, you're laying on the roof of your house, watching the stars blinking in the sky. You smell the smell of orange trees. You hear cicadas chirping in the bushes. You feel the wind passing through the trees, and you know the summer has been too warm. A louder noise from far swallows the wind around your ears. The sky lights up in colors. For a second, it seems like the sun has risen to meet another day. But the ground starts shaking. A storm of dust rises from the horizon, and you know you got to run for your life. You start to collect precious objects from your house. You don't know if you'll ever be able to return home again. You try to squeeze every single object into your memory. But all you can think of is the orange you have in your hand. What more can you bring? The moving view from the window turns blurry. All you can see are fragments from the side of the road. A crushed can of soda, a plastic bag, a pile of rocks. It seems to be an endless path. Eventually, the view turns into silent darkness. Your mind starts spinning. Past memories appear within. Then the memories start spinning until all the fragments fly away, except loneliness, eventually hunger and thirst. You don't know where to go. The only thing and the only light that is shining would be your direction. You wake up months later from what has seemed to be a nightmare. But you're in a strange new land where nothing is familiar to you anymore. People pass on the streets so quickly, since you know they all have a destination. You try to remind yourself you're still curious about tomorrow. You're given a box filled with objects. It covers your most basic needs: a toothbrush, a bed, a blanket, and a pillow. You think you might be able to call this home again. There are voices encouraging you to make the most out of your time, but you know that nothing is for certain. You start to realize that your life seems to be measured with different needs here. Everything has thoughtfully been considered into the last detail. Yet your heart is longing for a different kind of comfort. A comfort which indicates a home, a true belonging. As time goes by, you find yourself endlessly staring out of the window of the box. Seasons change in its own pace, where every second is shorter than the last. Somewhere in time, days have become pale, undefined, and forgotten. You start to think of all those warm summer nights on the roof of your house. The memories seem to fade away. But you still hear the sound of trees slowly rocking back and forth. You still feel the wind blowing through your hair, until your eyes feel heavy and the mind floats away. The story which I just told you is a testimony from just one of many told by an asylum seeker, telling the hardships and experiences in the first meeting with a new country. This story was read in a Pecha Kucha session and presentation at the Stockholm Design Week at an event held by Svensk Forum. So, let's start with the hard and raw data. During 2014 and 15, we analyzed the asylum living and housing situation in Sweden. As one exercise out of many, we did just a simple word count, comparing the minimum public procurement requirements for housing. So we compared housing for elderly people, housing for adults with special needs, housing for children with special needs, and asylum housing provided by the Migration Authority. It's pretty small here, but it starts with dignity at the top. Then we have needs, safety, wishes, home-like, and ability. As you can guess, on the right-hand side, we have the word counts for asylum housing. Also, in the requirement specification for housing establishments, the use of words referring to the individual are significantly fewer for the asylum housing residents than that for residents of retirement homes and LSS homes. And you can see, or maybe you can't, it's pretty small, but the red bar where it says 0, that's for asylum housing. Then we also compare the spatial descriptions of asylum housing and housing for the elderly. So at the top you have asylum housing description for the spatial qualities, and then the lower bar is housing for elderly people. So I'm just going to read the top content and compare it to the one below. So this is what it says. The establishment should provide adequate protection against heat, cold, moisture, noise, radon, air pollution, and other similar disturbances. Access to running water in a required amount and of acceptable quality for drinking, cooking, personal hygiene, and other household purposes. Sufficient daylight. In the bottom box for housing for elderly people, it says, a good home-like environment. Our work resulted in a report, an article in Arkitekten, and a workshop with the Migration Board and the Swedish National Board of Housing, Building and Planning. And I just have to say that we were the only architects among 15 teams attending the workshop discussing the future of refugees and asylum situation in Sweden. So, who are we? We're called Codesign Research Studio. We're a very young studio. We are now 4.5 years old, started in 2014. So we're independent, and as you said, we're non-profit, and we investigate the architectural implications of today's politics. So with our professional architectural tools and methods, we use architecture as evidence, identifying conflicts or misunderstandings between users of space and decision makers. By visualizing the problem in 2 and 3 dimensions, through, again, our tools, our professional tools, drawings, models, spaces, etc., we create a platform for discussion with the aim of finding solutions that would bring the 2 groups closer to each other. So in that sense, we, Codesign Research Studio, act as a mediator or link between users and decision makers. So these are some of the questions that we raise in our daily work. Spatial responsibilities, what are the roles and responsibilities of an architect? Where and how could our professional skills make a difference? As a super small studio, also very young, as I just mentioned, with limited economic means, our strategy is to find big and well-known allies. This is probably the biggest one. Another key component, when being as small as we are, is communication. The research means nothing, really nothing, if it is not communicated through the right platforms so that the information reaches the right people. We're built upon a 1-year program where we take in a new group of researchers on September 1st. And our work is really built on the amazing energy and involvement of these people working in the studio. So the first 3 years of our existence, our focus was on refugees. And currently, starting 2017, our new focus are children. And in this year's team, we have Hanna Ivansson, Daniela Ricci Sacciatelli, and Rose Ann Hallgren. So I'm going to show a few examples of our work. This one is about the borders of Europe. And the research during the project Body and Border is based on using digital 2- and 3-dimensional mapping of a political state. The method visualizes and creates alternative understandings of our society. Another way of describing our work is critical cartography. So what we did is that we studied and documented the border barriers that have been built between 2000 and 2015 in Europe, and created a digital 3D library of Europe's border typologies. Really exciting. The studies acted as a basis for an exhibition where we related the border architecture to the human body. Our research questions the purpose and consequences of the border constructions in Europe through investigating their physical manifestation and the context they are in. We used architectural tools and methods such as on-site visits, drawings and models, as well as collecting hard and soft data to understand and document the border barriers. But as I said, most importantly, we studied the constructions in relation to the human body. This image shows an exploded view of a border barrier structure that was studied at the site visit at the border between Serbia and Hungary. We viewed the borders through an architect's lens, deconstructed them into lines, drawings, components, and compositions. We identified different border typologies and documented the complementary surveillance systems. The physical border systems are monitored by surveillance systems detecting sound, smell, movement, heat, mobile signals, pulse and vibrations. It's super complex. The borders are also patrolled by border guards, armed police and riot police. This slide shows an example of our geometric studies. Here you can see a projection of the concertina wire. This is a full-scale model on the lower picture of the same concertina wire in a study on how the body interacts with the structure when moving through it. This is a specific fence that was built in the Spanish enclaves in North Africa and fully covers the 8 to 11 kilometers border on land. It has evolved in several stages, and this is typical for the border situations throughout Europe, into the current structure of 3 layers of fences. And the purpose of the border barrier seems to be to distance oneself, or in this case, the government of the country, from responsibility. This is showing how it grew. Here it's 6 meters tall. And if you look at this border situation, it has several layers and a very, very complex system of wires. Låter det konstigt? Nej. System of wires where if one person kind of steps on a wire, another person further away is affected. So someone has really thought this through on a very, very large detail level. This is a detail of an anticline fence. It's designed so that you perfectly cannot put your fingers in or your hand. This is a detail of a barbed wire. This is the concertina wire close-up. And this is a graphic layering of the same border situation. So the distancing and dehumanizing can be seen in the historical context of this type of architecture. In the fences and barbed tape that has its origin in holding cattle, then used against people in war, later prisons and concentration camps. Our research resulted in an exhibition, as I said in the beginning, that traveled in Europe. It has been exhibited in Stockholm, Brussels, Belgrade in Serbia, as well as Timisoara in Romania. And by exposing the visitor and their bodies to the full-scale drawings, another understanding is achieved. It is direct and instant. The effect that the border architecture has on the human body and mind does not need further explanation. So what we saw in our research is that the strength of the border construction doesn't really reduce the pressure or flow of people. It just creates alternative routes. And these new routes result in new barriers or new ways of controlling the borders. So we put together statistics, most of it's from Europol, and found the total cost of the fortifications, also the maintenance and surveillance of the border. And added to that the cost that refugees have to pay traffickers to get through the border. And we wonder, what could have been differently, and what can we do in the future? So now we jump to Venice, the Biennale 2016. As you know, it was with the theme, Reporting from the Front. And the theme felt perfect for what we had in mind, but we were not invited, and we're not able to even get tickets to the opening event. So we found our way in by arriving through water. We had a plan. The plan was to execute an action that we called Include Me. We created 1,255 scale figures that represented the 1,255,000 refugees that sought asylum in Europe during 2015. Each one had a unique handwritten number with instructions. The Biennale visitors were asked to place them in a project, to find a place where they could belong. The instructions were then to take a photo of the figure in their new context and upload it on Instagram or Twitter. This is a figure in Arvena's own installation in the main pavilion. The opening event lasted for 2 days, and soon the models, the scale figures, filled Giardini, and the refugees became an integral part of the Biennale. I'll quickly just run through some examples because there are amazing images at Instagram. And, people really kind of took care of these small people and found beautiful positions for them. Okay, that brings me to the next project that's called No Way. This is an image that most of us recognizes. We know that more than 60 million people are displaced in the world today, not having a home of their own. 22 million people are refugees, people fleeing conflict or persecution. 3.2 million people seek asylum in the world. 1.3 million people seek refuge in Europe. And in 2015, 162,000 were seeking refuge in Sweden. This is when the situation was labeled a crisis. But what we don't know much about is what these red lines, I don't know if you can see them, what they actually mean. And as architects, we have a particular interest in understanding the line, the drawings being the basic element of an architect's communication. The line, in this case, is all but straight. It is time extruding into 1 hour, 1 day, and 1 week. The tallest line here representing 1 week. The line also represents a series of spatial typologies for different processes that we identified in the interviews. Assembly, detention, hideout, meeting point, pause, and transport. So if you would compare our journey, our line, meaning people with visa, with the journey of a refugee, there is a difference in cost. A flight with visa from Turkey to Europe, for instance, costs about 200 euro, whilst the average cost for a refugee to reach their final destination in Europe is 8,000 euro. Our journey is also much shorter. In this case, it's 45 times shorter. And in this particular interview case, it took this person 22.5 days, which might not sound like an immense amount of time, but the issue is that you don't know how long it's going to take. And it's this uncertainty that is hard. The refugee journey is also 9,833 times more dangerous, as 1 out of 478 refugees taking the Eastern Mediterranean route did not reach their destination. This is data from 2015. And as architects, our focus lies in investigating the spaces along the journey. So this section compares the spaces of our journey with that of a refugee. And these are 2 more interviews that we had that represent the spatial kind of sections, sequences that they had to go through. We also made in-depth studies of different specific spatial situations with focus on their impact on the human body. The zoom in is about the human body's need of oxygen. The interviewee went from Turkey to Greece in a truck with another 100 people. The trip was 10 hours long. The truck's total amount of air was 70 cubic meters, which means about 0.7 cubic meters of air per person. The oxygen level of the air constantly drops, and after 90 minutes, in this particular situation, the oxygen level starts running low. This accelerates if people get anxious because you breathe more deeply. This truck stopped every 2 hours to let new air in, so they were all right in this case. But you know that there were cases where they did not stop frequently enough. Our work was translated into an audio walk around the Cultural Institute in Stockholm during Culture Night. The talk was 30 minutes and 600 meters long. Every visitor got a pair of headphones, a radio receiver, and was escorted by a guide who read stories from our interviews describing different spatial situations. On 4 out of these different spots, we made full-scale drawings on the ground. The drawings were made from laser-cut templates and sprayed onto the pavement. And here are a few pictures from the making. We also collaborated with NICE, which is newly arrived architects in Sweden, throughout the whole project, and they also helped us execute the making of the drawings. We had a police permit for the drawings and were allowed to keep them for about 2 weeks before we had to clean them away. During this time, we had guided walks for school classes and for the public. In total, we had 15 walks and about 400 visitors. So why did we do this project? What was the aim of Norway? And as architects, we do not want to make the spaces that we have identified better. We actually want to eliminate them. So we want to eliminate the spaces that are harmful to the human body and the mind. We are aware of the fact that the elimination of these spaces might not lie in our profession, and that we need to collaborate with other fields. Our task as architects is to raise the question of the validity of these spaces. So looking at this diagram, it goes from 2013 to 2017 on your right-hand side. You can see that the spatial and juridical barriers add up with time. It becomes thicker on your right-hand side. Less refugees are getting into Europe. But as the routes are more dangerous, more people also die. Okay, so last year our focus shifted, and now we're working with children. So we started a new 3-year period, and we focus on children and their spatial rights. I don't know if you know, but the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child will be inscribed in Swedish law on January 20th, 2020. So in that sense, it's a burning question. How will the law affect children's rights to be included in the process of defining the spaces they occupy? The convention consists of 54 articles and 3 protocols. There is also an observation organ, and this is one observation report that was sent to the Swedish government by the Committee on the Rights of the Child in 2015. This one affected us particularly, and we thought it was really important to investigate. Could it be true that we, in Sweden, hold children in solitary confinement, that we strap and belt them today? So we went out to research what children were held in detention. And we found out that there are these 4 groups: children that have committed a crime, children that are suspected of having committed a crime, children applying for asylum, and children with mental illness and psychological disorders. And where could we find the places that these children were spending their time in? And it's SIS youth homes, that's the National Board of Institutional Care. It's custody, it's compulsory psychiatric care, migration agency detention centers, and arrest. Very soon, we realized that these spaces were extremely difficult to access. It was very hard to find even information about them. But the obstacles that we met on the way made us even more sure that we had to find, communicate, and highlight the environments where architecture is used as a tool to detain children. This is how our project, Hidden Space, started. Data that we managed to collect show that 4,456 children were held in detention during 2017 in Sweden. And pretty soon we decided that the best approach to the situation was to work directly with the children and empower them through sharing our professional knowledge and include them in the design process from the beginning to the end. We concluded also that the best way to get access to the children and their spaces was through collaboration. Our strategy was to contact the institutions and offer them our architectural services for free. After several weeks and loads of phone calls, we got positive answers from SIS Barbie in Uppsala and also BUP-akutenhet in Stockholm, and we contacted all the institutions. We decided to collaborate with SIS Barbie and ended up developing an educational program for the youth that can be shared and spread to all the SIS institutions in Sweden. We also designed and built an interior in one of the abandoned houses in the institutional area, and this was done together with the youth that were living there. And the idea was that this should be a showcase, because a lot of the SIS institutional housing has these empty, has a lot of these empty houses, so this is something that could be multiplied. This year, we zoomed out to the urban city scale. Despite finding research and state formulations and methodologies that extend all the way back to the 1970s about how children's perspectives should be included in social development, Sweden still has no overall method and inclusion culture that actively enables constructive engagement of children in decisions about urban planning and design. We're running two parallel projects. One is called Barnevalen, and it gathers national initiatives that work with children and their rights to be involved in the process of decision-making at an urban scale. The initiatives are collected and will be put into a report, and that report will be delivered to the government on the 20th of January 2020 in a carnival that will run through the city of Stockholm. If you are interested and want to read more about that initiative, you can go into barnevalen.nu. The second project is a collaborative project with children from Europaskolan, Europe School, and Stockholm City. We're developing a workshop series together with the children based on their own needs and not what we as adults think that their needs are. In the 12th article of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the children's right to be heard is described in all questions that concern them. But we rarely let children's views and insights get real influence. And this is largely due to lack of laws that defend children's rights to express their opinions and insights in urban development. This limits our children's physical and mental development. It inhibits their interest in politics and social processes and reduces the possibility of building more sustainable cities. Professor Peter Levin argues that citizen engagement does not occur by itself, but must be thought. Participation in urban development prepares children for active citizenship. If children are included, educated, and taken seriously, civic engagement and responsibility can be established as something natural and obvious. If we allow children to participate in the design of their surroundings, their right to and insight into the condition of the urban environment is also promoted and also creates a better decision-making base. If the children are recognized as citizens in their own context, democracy is enabled and expanded. So let's start now. Placemaking is the participatory act of imagining and creating places together with other people. It cultivates hope and possibility. On that note, I will end my lecture with images from our kickoff session, which you can see here. as well as a short film clip from our balloon activism on Parking Day. How do I turn this on? Thank you for listening.